Welcome to On Meaning. Today with Tamir, Dortal, and Heather McDonald, we'll dive into a topic that's on everyone's mind, yet isn't often deeply explored. Have you ever wondered why there are so few black people in executive positions? Why is this considered racism, while large numbers of Asians in advanced math and science high schools isn't? Heather McDonald, author of the new book, When Race Trumps Merit, is asking challenging questions about what truly lies behind these issues. Is it in fact racism which leads to these disparities, or is there something else occurring? Are we putting too much emphasis on race and not enough on merit? How is this affecting our schools, jobs, police forces, and even our arts, music, and culture? Most importantly, what will happen to our society if we continue down this path? Heather's book is bold and thought-provoking. It may challenge what you thought you knew about race and success in America. Join us today as we ask difficult questions, explore different points of view, and try to understand what truly lies at the heart of these complex issues. It's a conversation you won't want to miss.
על המשמעות, פודקאסט פילוסופי פוליטי.
Today on On-Meaning podcast, I have the pleasure of having Heather McDonald. Thank you for coming. Actually, after I've heard your interviews at the Ben Shapiro show and Jordan Peterson's and Dave Rubin, I said to myself that it would be a great privilege to have you here. So thank you for coming.
I appreciate the honor. It's mine, Tamir. Thank you so much for having me on.
And today we're going to deal about your latest book, When Race Trumps Merit. And actually, I wanted to start with a personal note. Last week, I was in Yellowstone for 4 days, and your book was in my mind. And I said to myself, why didn't I see even one Afro-American in the park? I saw thousands of people, Indians and Hispanics and, people from Asia, people from all around the world, but I didn't see even one Afro-American. And I think that your book deals with issues like that, but not everyone can see those issues, not in a racist way. Could you please elaborate? What did I saw last week?
Well, if you were the National Park Service, which runs Yellowstone and other great national monuments, you would be seeing racism. The only allowable explanation in American society today for any racial disparity, whether it's the overrepresentation of blacks in prison or the underrepresentation of blacks in the national parks or at Google, at an oncology lab, is got to be racism. The fact that there may be different preferences, different cultures, is simply not allowed in our public discourse.
So you mean that we just have one good or one right answer for everything? When we see less blacks than usual or more blacks than usual, like in prisons, so the only explanation that we can explain to ourselves as a society is that it's racism. But how come? How did it become the only answer that we give ourselves as a society?
Well, that's very complicated. It comes in part out of America's extraordinarily troubling, tragic, shameful history of race, and the fact that for so many decades and centuries, America violated its founding ideals with regards to its gratuitously nasty treatment of blacks. But we are not that country today. The reality is black privilege, not white privilege, and that's been the case for a very long time. But we are terrified, the American elites are terrified that the real reason for racial disparities, which is the academic skills gap on the one hand, that explains the underrepresentation of blacks in meritocratic institutions and the high rates of black crime, which explains the overrepresentation of blacks in the criminal justice system. The elites are terrified that those gaps are not going to go away. And so they are proleptically putting out there the only allowable explanation as racism so that we cannot talk about culture. That's taboo. And we sure as hell cannot even get close to any issues of heritability.
But so you mean that this answer actually gives us a sense of control, that we can change things, but if the answer maybe is culture, which is, I think, more is a better answer, it wouldn't give us the same control on our society, on our way for getting things to be better?
Well, the only group now that is asked to change anything is whites. I'm going to be very honest. The assumption is that, again, any problems or lack of representation that blacks face is exclusively the result of this phantom racism, that somehow, even though there's not a single mainstream institution in the United States today that isn't trying to hire and promote as many blacks as possible, somehow we're supposed to believe that these same institutions, most ludicrously American universities, are discriminating. So the idea is, yes, it's all for whites to change, and that's why we have these huckster white privilege consultants going around having, guilt sessions with whites who cry about their privilege or cry being called that they are racist. And what's never allowed to be said is that there may be some cultural changes that are absolutely urgent with regards to black underclass culture if we want to have any hope of equal outcomes.
But we think, we hear a lot in the media and from academia that every black that is trying to be more like the things that are meritocratic, more like, not only the white, but more like the Asians, more to invest in education, more to promote those kind of things, more, even to create a family. Today, more than 70, you may know the data,
71%,
of blacks are grown up without a father in the home. So it's either that a father is not really significant and doesn't have any role in the life of a human being, of a child, or either we should be judgmental about it and to tell those women or those men don't run off. You have an obligation to raise your kid and to say to the welfare state that is actually promoting and encouraging this by giving money to single mothers, saying, okay, we know that for the short term, it's going to be really painful not to have those subsidies for being single moms. But on the long run, maybe the black family will, go back to what it was maybe 100 years ago, 70 years ago. Like Thomas Sowell wrote about this issue, that many, like the percentage of whole families, and not really a lot of divorce rates before the 60s, before the Great Society of Johnson, was better than the whites, right?
Yeah.
Or much closer?
It's closer, right.
So what should we do?
Well, you started out saying that we're told that whites who do try are what? You didn't finish the thought.
That blacks are trying. So
blacks are trying, but they're not getting...
So
I don't hear about many examples of that, frankly.
So it's like acting white. If someone is trying to behave in a meritocratic way, like blacks that are trying to act in a meritocratic way to, be more successful or to try harder to avoid drugs, alcohol,
well, that's
families.
not the meaning of the term acting white.
So what's acting white?
You are using it as a term of commendation. In fact, the acting white conceit is probably the most lethal idea within black underclass culture. It is a term of disparagement. If a student is taking his textbooks home to study, which is rare, if he is not truant in school, if he is paying attention to his teacher, if he is actually doing his homework to prepare for a test, that is viewed by his peers as acting white. And so the idea is if you are not engaged in oppositional culture, you are selling out your race. So in fact, the peer pressure is just the opposite. It is to check out, to not make an effort, to not try to compete, and it's rationalizing the real, basically.
So what you're saying, that they are saying to each other in the black society, is that actually everything that is going to promote you is white, and a resentment culture or crime is your true race. This is like what you should do. This is your culture. Your culture is crime.
Well, listen to rap lyrics, listen to gangster rap. You know, we've stopped listening to that, but there was a period.
It's something really racist to say, to say, if I would say to a black, your culture is being violent, so I would be the biggest racist on earth, and I will be thrown out from all of the social societies that I'm a member of.
Well, there are double standards aplenty. I mean, we could spend the rest of the hour talking about them. Let's look at the N-word. If a black is in remote proximity to a white person who is simply quoting the use of the N-word in Mark Twain, say, that is allegedly a lethal threat that is going to prevent that black person from succeeding in life. Meanwhile, on Twitter, there's like 5 million uses of the N-word every month by other blacks. They absolutely call each other that. So there's a whole set of double standards. And yes, if whites were to write rap songs about black culture that had the same degree of misogyny, anti-Semitism, homophobia, glorification of guns, and say that's black, that would not be accepted, but it's okay to embrace that themselves. And as I say, there is nothing more counterproductive than the glorification. And it's not just blacks of underclass behavior and oppositional culture. It is now not just blacks that are saying that. We have our leading institutions that have announced that respect for rationality, respect for the scientific method are white traits. The Smithsonian Institution, used to be one of the leading science research organizations in the United States in the 19th century. Now it's got these wonderful museum complexes on the wall in Washington. But a year or so ago, they published on their website at the African American Museum a list of white traits, and it was things like promptness, objectivity, competitiveness, self-control. So the whole culture is engaged in one big excuse-making enterprise at this point.
It sounds really not persuasive. Like if I'm an alien and I, just landed here, You're saying, okay, so all the good things are white, and who says those things is blacks. So it's meaning that all of those progressive activists are actually cursing blacks and really giving a lot of good words and really good atmosphere to the white society, but they are saying to the brothers, to the black community, you shouldn't be that way, and it's really not persuasive. Like, why would I, as a small black kid, would want to listen to those activists instead of listening to things that have been tested and have been successful? Like, if you read the biography of Thomas Sowell, Maverick, it's really a big recommendation from me. You would see that he was working hard for all of his life. He was under the Jim Crow laws back in the 50s in Washington, D.C. He ate in a separate dining room, but he did his homework. Right. And he really was working hard until now, until his 90s. And this is the way to succeed. But why don't black kids or black mothers saying, "Oh my God, we don't understand it right. We should be acting white. It's not some curse. It's something to aspire for."
Well, it was a transformation for the worse of the culture. It breaks my heart when I see pictures of some of the great jazz giants of the 20th century, Ella Fitzgerald or Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, dressed to the nines, just absolutely fabulously turned out to live up to the bourgeois norms. And it's like ships passing in the night. Up until the 1960s, many blacks were adopting middle-class behavior, bourgeois norms within their own communities. They had proms, they had cotillions, they had insurance companies, clubs, self-help organizations, and white society kept excluding them and beating them back. And there was simply nothing they could do. Now, there were obviously musicians and artists that were accepted. But by and large, the average white person was, especially in the South, was truly hateful. Now, as bad as that past was, that is not our reality today. That is not. Now, whites are desperate to be post-racial. They want blacks. The white Republicans have had one love affair after another with black politicians, whether it's Herman Cain or Colin Powell. It just goes on and on. Alan Keyes, Alan West, Burgess Owens. And now when whites are finally saying, my God, we have to atone for this past, here we are with open arms, the black culture has gone 180 degrees in the opposite direction. And there are possible explanations for that. And one of which is pure speculation, is that when the gates of segregation came down and it became a matter of, okay, now you're going to have to compete. You're not just competing against other blacks, but you're competing in the society at large. You had an ideology that came out that said, no, don't compete. Don't even try. And we will celebrate being apart. And it's, as I say, it's a tragic, almost Shakespearean case of really bad timing and the opportunities being missed. But the opportunities are still there. I mean, again, I cannot stress enough. I don't know if I think America gets such distorted press. So I'm sure that the portrayal of America in the Israeli press continues to be, it's white supremacist culture. I cannot stress enough that is just not the case. Blacks are being preferred at every undergraduate college, at every medical school, at every law school, at every bank, at every corporate law firm. Federal government is doling out science research awards on the basis of race. We are not discriminating. The problem now is, again, the academic skills gap and the crime gap.
So you're actually saying that maybe the black mother or the black child are not persuading by those ideas of let's compete, let's be more meritocratic, let's act white in order to succeed, because it's really comforting to blame someone else of your problems that maybe you can't really solve. A black child without a father can't really solve his situation. He can't have good role models, good male role models, except the gangs and maybe the friends of your mother that are switching every few years or few months. And you don't really have control on the situation. And these neo-Marxist ideas are comforting, telling you it's okay to be like who you are. It really reminds me of other things in neo-Marxism, like fat blaming in cynical theories of Lindsay. He devotes a whole chapter about being fat. So it's really hard to lose weight, but it's really easy to tell you, you're perfect as you are. Let's put you on the cover of Vogue or Sports Illustrated.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And there's an overlap there, too, with race. I mean, there's very little in America today that doesn't touch on race. The Scientific American, which is one of the leading science journals, sort of for popular consumption, but there's still very serious work that's published. They, like every medical journal, science journal in the United States, after the George Floyd mass psychosis racial meltdown, have decided that their mission is anti-racism. And they gave an entire issue over to the science of racism in the United States. And one of the articles was that to suggest to black women who are obese that it would be a good thing to lower their weight for their health is racist. So you're not allowed to, as a doctor, to give what is the most important medical advice for black people to lose weight, because that's seen as racist. So we're celebrating obesity And with COVID, where we're supposed to believe that the reason blacks had a higher mortality rate was racism, which was never defined.
How can a biological creature, which is like smaller than a human cell, can be racist?
Well, this was in treatment, which again was completely fantastical. But the reason is higher obesity rates. Comorbidities is what explains it, and yet we would rather deny a life-saving public health measure if it meant saying that, well, there's maybe something blacks can do for themselves, or they have certain behavioral traits. Americans are fat generally. I mean, let's be honest. It's a disgusting society at this point, but it's the problem of obesity is even higher among blacks. We would rather deny that life-saving advice to lose weight, get more exercise, smoke less, take less drugs, then say, okay, there's something you can do to change and help yourself.
So what I see from all those examples is that there is a connection, and the connection is personal responsibility.
Right.
If you can help your situation, like, every one of the successful people me and you know, so it's bad because you have personal responsibility. But if you can blame other communities or other people that succeed, like meritocratic societies, so it's better. And if you can blame the state or a big institution with billions and billions that they hadn't done anything, it's also good because it's not your responsibility. It means that you're not to blame for what you do. And me and you maybe are called racist because we tell the people, if you don't work up to help yourselves, you can't succeed. Sorry, this is the truth. This is the reality. This is the painful reality, but we can't say anything else because this is what we saw in the past that helped communities like, let's say, Jews. They have been discriminated and put into ovens in Auschwitz, but a generation after, like my grandfather, he was released from Auschwitz in December by the Russians, and he went back home. He saw that all of his family didn't came back, was murdered, and I'm all with the goosebumps. And he said he was standing in front of his empty house and told himself, without $1 in his pocket, being in a Soviet state, I'm going to be optimistic. I'm going to build myself, my life, and I'm all. And he ran away from the Soviet Empire, this evil empire, and he went to Israel and he built his life also in a socialist state. But he said, no, I'm the one that should take care of myself. He didn't have a father to call to because he was in ashes. He didn't have any relatives. And he said to himself, I'm in charge of my life. It depends on me if I'm going to be happy, successful, or if I'm going to have nightmares every night and tell it's all because of those Nazis, those Germans that did this to me, and to blame and spend all of his life blaming and putting a finger to Europe. כמה מכם פנו אליי לגבי זה שהם עשו מנוי למידה, אבל לא קיבלו קישור לעל המשמעות פלוס. אז רציתי להבהיר את הדרגות של המנויים לאתר מידע. יש לנו מנוי ב-25 שקלים, המאפשר כניסה למפגש הזום השבועי ביום חמישי בשעה 9. מי שעושה מנוי ב-60 שקלים גם מקבל גישה לעל המשמעות פלוס. פודקאסט עם מעל 200 פרקים שאתם יכולים להאזין לו דרך נגן הפודקאסטים המועדף אליכם, ומי שעושה מנוי ב-120 שקלים גם חשוף לעל המשמעות פלוס, גם נכנס למפגשי הזום השבועים, וגם חשוף לכל התוכן פרימיום שגדי טאוב ועקיבא ביגמן מפרסמים למנויים שלהם. אז אני כמובן ממליץ על 120 שקלים, ואפילו יותר למי שיכול, כדי לעזור לנו להפיק את הפודקאסט ולהשפיע על חייהם של אלפי אנשים. תודה רבה.
Well, I think your was it great-grandfather, grandfather?
No, grandfather.
Grandfather. He was an extraordinary man. I think there's very few people of any group that would have that degree of true grit and motivation and courage and the willingness to keep going. So that's asking a lot of any group to live up to his model. But obviously, to the extent that we can have any portion of your grandfather's values, this would be still an extraordinary country. And I would say that it is exactly personal responsibility that is the dividing line of the more conservative worldview and the more progressive worldview, that progressives are going to see every outcome in terms of social forces beyond an individual's control. And conservatives are more likely to see, no, there's various behavioral issues that are within an individual's control that explain outcomes. And both sides think that the other is blind. You know, the progressive looks at the conservative and says, well, how can you possibly think that somebody should be, you know, taking his textbook home to study or not hanging out in gangs when he's surrounded by all these malign influences? And the conservative looks at the progressive and says, but we have free will. It remains within our power always to better ourselves. And so that's kind of a divide that is very hard to bridge. That having been said, I will say that no group wants to have other people criticize it, you know, so it's very hard. Blacks don't want to be told that they are acting in counterproductive ways. And so they're going to become defensive. You know, the white underclass in the United States is growing very fast. It's trying to mimic blacks in especially family breakdown. It's maybe 44% in the white underclass. Overall, the white out of wedlock birth rate is about 28%. They don't have drive-by shootings. Blacks have a monopoly on drive-by shootings in this country. Anytime you hear about a drive-by shooting, it's a black. End of story. But whites, you know, they've now adopted, and some of their advocates like Tucker Carlson, rather than saying this hillbilly meth head culture has to change, there's some people that are saying, well, it's all because of the lack of jobs and stuff. So we take that excuse making as well. I would just say, I am sick of hearing Black leaders say, lower standards on our behalf. You know, we can't pass the teacher licensing exam in New York.
Or the bar. You give a great example in this book.
We'll throw out the teacher licensing exam. We'll lower the bar exam. We'll get rid of the bar exam. We'll get rid of the medical college admissions test. We'll get rid of medical licensing exam scores because we are failing disproportionately. Throw out the test. Here's what I'd like to hear from Black leaders. We'll meet your standards. We'll not only meet them, we will beat them. That's what Jews said. You're keeping us out of your banks. You're keeping us out of your country clubs. We'll be so good you have to hire us. Or we'll form competing firms and industries, and we'll beat you at your own game. That's how you get revenge against discrimination, not going around tearing down standards. But on the other hand, if your goal is to really destroy your alleged enemy, there's no better strategy than what the race activists are doing now, because we are tearing down every meritocratic standard in this society that is the basis of civilizational advance in the name of fighting disparate impact.
Yeah, so if I go back to my alien character that just landed here, I would, if I listen to you, I think, you know, maybe those activists hate the West, hate their society.
Of course they do.
They hate everything and they want to destroy it. Like,
yes.
Who would say to people that are, you know, in the worst condition, that are poor, that are ignorant, that really have gaps in all kinds of things, you know, you should be blaming someone else and this is what will help you maybe? But I'm like, why do they hate themselves and their societies so badly? Like, I'm sure that everyone that learned history knows that societies are fragile. That if you look at Rome in its gold age, in the Republic age, you see that, you know, they had those parties like today, even bigger, but it was the beginning of crumbling, and Cato the Old told them, we're crumbling, we have to go back to our old virtues, our old ideas, and society is so fragile. They are playing with fire, and how come not everyone knows it, that they hate their black society? Maybe they want them to be in a civil war that will end in, I don't know, in mayhem.
No, we are asking for race war. I mean, at some point, and this is very, very dangerous to say, but if at some point whites start to develop the same racial consciousness as everybody else is allowed to have in the United States, and which would be only fair as far as I'm concerned. It's rational and it's fair and it's okay. Right now, the only allowable discourse about whites is unremittingly negative. All you need to do if you're the New York Times or the Washington Post or the CNN is append the epithet white to an individual or an institution, and you have thereby discredited that individual. And whites are so not white supremacist that they don't even hear it. They think, Biden, he's a great unifier. His inaugural speech upon becoming president was white bashing. It was all about the stain of
white bashing.
Yes, it was saying.
No, but what is white bashing? Not everyone is from academia that knows those terms.
White bashing. He's just saying that whites. He brought up his favorite theme of whites still being the source of violence and white supremacist threat and the stain on American soul. And white Americans are so well-meaning that they don't object to this. They just think, well, okay, that's who we are, I guess. So it is an amazingly asymmetrical discourse that is based on hatred. And the mob can tear things down. They cannot create. They can tear down the statues. They can tear down the books. They can tear down the history. And they can't put anything in its place. Now, I will say that, again, this gets to very profound divisions of how we understand reality. And the progressives would say that those self-help mechanisms that you talk about, Horatio Alger, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, have a good be optimistic, believe in your own efficacy, that all of that is fatally naive, that unless we change the structures of society, we are just administering a narcotic to people so that they won't demand radical social change. And I've been engaged in various audible reading, audiobook listening projects recently, one of deep dive into Black history. Listen to the 1619 Project. There's some things I agree with, like about our past. I don't agree with its present analysis. And I thought, well, it becomes so egomaniacal, the 1619 Project, everything is about race. I thought, okay, well, let me get a different perspective. I've listened to Howard Zinn's People's History of America. Zinn is a infamous book for conservatives. It's history from the bottom up, which was a trend that came out of France of we're no longer going to do political history. We're going to look at, the lower classes and how they lived. And I actually loved Zinn because it was refreshing. It was so pure in its outlook. It was a platonic ideal of left-wing hatred for accomplishment, for success. Anybody with wealth is per se evil. But he would say that your recipe is just ridiculous because society is stacked against the poor. The rich control everything, and they work to prevent class solidarity. Like Zinn is always hoping for some white-black worker coalition, and it never happens. But they would acknowledge the criticism and say, sorry, individual efficacy is trivial. And as long as we have these structures of, it used to be economic structures, now it's structures of white supremacy.
Yeah, but those structures or those social structures, if you see them all around the world, if you see that the same methods are being implemented in China, right, or in non-Western societies in order to succeed. Yeah. So it means that it isn't really something social that you can change, a social structure or a social something that, they say that things are social, so they can change it through changing the social structure or putting the government instead of the social structures. But if you see that it's universal, so maybe it's something that it's just like mathematics. If you do objective tests, some people are going to fail and some people are going to succeed. And like Thomas Sowell has written about, like in 1989, in his essay, Affirmative Action, a Worldwide Disaster, he actually shows in this article that was published in Commentary that, we have disparities in all societies all around the world. In Africa, we have some tribes that are specialize on making this, or in the US, Germans are the almost only brewers and piano makers, and the best, all the 5 best are Germans. Mm-hmm. And Jews, they used to work in textile industry, and it wasn't in order to be a monopoly. It was just something they were better at. They had either an ultimate advantage or comparison advantage. So if it's something that happens all around the world, how can you call it social?
הרבה מכם שאלתם אותי לגבי מעשר כספים וגם לגבי סעיף 46. אנחנו כרגע עובדים על סעיף 46, אבל הדבר היותר מעניין זה ששאלתי את הרב שרקי לגבי מעשר כספים, והוא אמר לי שכמובן אפשר לתרום חלק ממעשר הכספים לפודקאסט על המשמעות. אז מי שזה מעניין אותו ומי שרוצה לתמוך בעשייה הציבורית שלנו, מוזמן לתמוך גם במעשר כספים, או לשאול את הרב שלכם.
Well, I guess in the case of the United States race discourse, they would simply deny the relevance of any non-American examples. I mean, they would say that America's relationship to blacks is sui generis, although they would also say that it's the very character of the Enlightenment is racial. I mean, it's a totalizing discourse that, I mean, at this point, we're just repeating. It refuses to recognize individual agency. And there's been a tension, not quite to this extreme, but obviously after the Civil War, when America was struggling with how to integrate slaves into society. And of course, the South very quickly gave up any hope of trying. But Booker T. Washington was advocating for self-help. And we have to cultivate our garden and build our skills up from the bottom up and work on developing trades and developing those bourgeois habits of deferred gratification. And he set up schools to do this. And he said, don't immediately demand political power and don't immediately demand access to the highest institutions. And he famously, there was a lot of tension between him and W.E.B. Du Bois, who said, no, we should be aspiring to all go to college. And Du Bois was more left-wing and was more interested in political power. Washington said, no, let's get economic power first, which is how many immigrants have done it. Yeah. You know, that Nathan Glazer has written about this, that there were certain groups, Asians in particular, that said, we're just going to become economic powerhouses here and not think that our route to success is through politics. Blacks have always said, no, our route to success is through wielding political power. And the Du Bois vision kind of won out, and Booker T. Washington is regarded in many Black activist circles as just sort of an Uncle Tom sellout. But I would say, especially given the condition of Blacks coming out of the Civil War, his emphasis on self-help, on developing the careful routines of trade and craft was absolutely the way to go.
So you were talking before, a few minutes ago, about tests and about admitting to universities. and about that they want to cancel anything, they want to cancel the bar, they want to cancel every test. So I have a few questions about it. First of all, if you really want a diverse university concerning race-wise, not political agenda, God forbid, you should just do a lottery.
Right.
Why shouldn't...
Absolutely.
So they are advocating for lottery in going into the universities?
It's hilarious. I mean...
Yeah? I didn't hear about it.
Again, like another of these completely inconsistent discourses. On the one hand, I mean, we are going so far in our racial apologetics. We are denying it's profoundly nihilistic. On the one hand, we deny that standardized tests measure anything real because they have a disparate impact. If they didn't have a disparate impact, nobody today would talk about getting rid of the SATs, our standardized admissions tests,
But is there even one test on the whole world doesn't have disparate impact? On, like, if you take society and you know, every test, this is the essence of a test, to have this impact.
Right. You wouldn't necessarily assume there would be group differences, but there are, and that's the rub. So there are group differences in how people do on standardized tests, and that's why we've decided that those standardized tests are racist, even though they're perfectly colorblind. It's the same thing with red light cameras. Red light cameras show that blacks run red lights and speed at higher rates, and so now those cameras are racist. They are completely, obviously not human, but if they have a disparate impact result, then by definition, it's a racist. So we're throwing out the cameras because they're racist.
You know, I think we should be on the attack, not on the defense line. Like in this book, you show, like, to the great extent with the best examples about really absurd and hilarious and preposterous things that have happened. Like, you know, you have in the Philharmonic, you have a test in order to get someone in. So even before these neo-Marxists started the blaming of racism, they wanted themselves to be objective. They didn't want to take the player that is not the best. So they put a curtain, so they won't see the guy that is playing, and they put a carpet so someone which goes with high heels, which is typically women, so you can't notice that she's a woman, but just by the way she plays or by the way he plays, and you're colorblind to races and to cultures and to anything. You just want a good player, right. And that's it. So I think that if we'll be on the attack, we should ask them, you know, give me one objective test that without you knowing the outcomes of the test and the disparate impact of the test is okay by you. Afterwards, we'll find the result, and we can measure them. But what will be an alternative except lottery? Because we know that lottery is a bad way, because then we have a first year of college which is really diverse, and on the second year, after they have spent the whole year and lots of money and moved from their towns and the rent and all of this, on the second year it will be non-diverse. Like today, you would have 90-something% whites and Asians, and you spend the whole year proving something that can't be proven. Oh, if you have a test, you can prove it.
Yeah. Well, we did try in lottery. There's gifted and talented programs in the United States are being torn down because they have disparate impact. And we have a set of public schools that are called exam schools. There's Stuyvesant High School in New York City, which is overwhelmingly Asian because it admits based on a neutral, colorblind, objective test. And in San Francisco, there was Lowell High School, which was also, very highly respected, extraordinarily successful in passing on education and knowledge to students. And it too was predominantly Asian and white. So the left-wing San Francisco school board said it's a racist exam to get in, and they went to a lottery system. And the proportion of D's and F's in the first year class went up 300%. I recently learned that they've gone back to the exam. I didn't know that. That's an extraordinary good development. But these universities that on the one hand claim that they're racist and tests are racist, they would not be willing to go to a lottery. They want a race norm within every group. So they want the best blacks within the black group and the best whites within the white group and the best Asians. But some of them now are actually banning the submission of SATs, which is a very curious move. And it's hard to figure out how this is going to work and it's all done so that there'll be less damning evidence for the fact that our American colleges will continue trying to use race preferences. If you have the test scores, that's like per se evidence that you're admitting, as is the case now, blacks are being admitted to colleges with objectively measured skills that would be automatically disqualifying if presented by whites and Asians because they're so low. As you say, what happens once they're admitted, catapulted into schools for which they're not competitively qualified, is that they fail. They wouldn't fail if they were going to college on the same conditions as every other student, which is with peers that share their academic levels of success. Nobody is saying blacks shouldn't go to college. They're saying, don't put this crippling handicap on them of catapulting them into the environment where they start out at the bottom in terms of academic skills, and they're going to stay at the bottom. But these schools now are saying, you're not even allowed to submit SATs. So how they're going to go about sorting, because they still want to get the best whites and Asians, is very curious. And I'm going to enjoy watching it because these schools, they're all incredibly hypocritical institutions. They blame themselves for phantom racism at the same time that they're admitting blacks with lower grades just because they want them. They're hiring blacks with lower qualifications because they're so desperate for them. And they still say, oh my God, we're racist. So it's really going to be very delicious to watch. And I don't know how they're going to manage it.
So, the right always telling the left, you're wrong. We don't say it. We do have a lot of emotion in it, and I came all the way here to meet you, and we all of the public intellectuals and the people in academia are putting a lot of effort in order to persuade the other side that they are wrong, like from the right. But the left tells us, you're not right, you're evil. And if we talk, I think, more about the emotional side of it, it will be maybe more persuasive because, I really feel a lot of pain for this student that, he had one happy day in his life. He got accepted to Harvard, and I'm sure that he's much more intelligent than me. And because he's in the top 1% of black academia skills and stuff like that. But after this day that he got the letter, he's sitting in a class and everyone ignores him because they know that he's an affirmative action student, and they don't ask him the questions, so maybe he can do homework with them. And as Thomas Sowell wrote in this article that I was talking about in 1989, that I think we should all read. So he said that no one would advocate that today's Jews are more... Oh, this is another quote. So he said that to jeopardize the respect and recognition of individual form of preferred groups by rewarding honors tainted with double standard is not only to downgrade their own achievements, but also to downgrade their chances of accomplishing those achievements in the first place. For example, after the media revealed that black students were admitted to Harvard Medical School with lower qualifications, white patients began to refuse to be examined by such students. The negative effects of tainted honors are by no means limited to academia. So I just put myself in his shoes of this black doctor, that people saying, we don't want to be racist. They don't say anything because they're polite, but they're saying, we prefer another doctor. And they don't have any information about him except him being black. So it means that the left, in saying that we are evil, and in promoting this affirmative action policies, they're promoting racism, and I'm all with the goosebumps. It hurt me so much to see this emotional disaster of these black doctors or black professors.
The Los Angeles Times did an article maybe 10 years ago about a black student from Compton who'd been admitted to the University of California at Berkeley, the premier flagship school in California and probably the premier public university in the country. And it was hell for him. His grades after his first year were absolutely rock bottom. He was at danger of failing out because you had to maintain some kind of GPA. The only class he did well in was Black Studies, and that got him to go into the sophomore year. But it documented the psychological stress this student was on, and he would have these sessions with himself saying, you just got to believe in yourself, just try. And he got tutors, and his writing got worse and worse. And the LA Times, of course, was unable to see the obvious moral for this, which is that this was a cruel policy. I feel completely the same way. These academic administrators that are committed to racial preferences are sadists because they are setting up these students for emotional dislocation. But of course, I keep just channeling the left to you, and I don't want to sound totally pessimistic or fatalistic, but all of these things that you raise have already been raised, and they already have answers for them. These are not new strategies,
I could say the same about your book. Everything has been written.
Everything's been written. We've
except
been making the
examples that are much more to the extreme than in the 80s or 70s.
Right. Right. But this is why we have this massive diversity bureaucracy in American universities. This preposterous idea. It's a way of hiring blacks so that you can get your vice provost of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging she's black and she's got a black staff. So you get your numbers up. These people have no skills. Like, what is their competence? There's no competence. They're supposed to be there to combat this racist institution. At the same time, again, this racist institution has hired you because you're black, and it's admitted black students because they're black, and yet they're still racist? Please explain that. But the whole reason for this is because blacks aren't doing as well, and they feel excluded, and then we have these another set of double standards and completely incoherent left-wing logics, which the argument for diversity in the student body is blacks represent blackness, and they're supposed to bring the platonic reality of being black is so different that no white person can possibly understand or know how to relate to a black person unless we've got these affirmative action racial preference admits. So they're there to be black, and then they complain about the fact that in their sociology class or constitution class, we're talking about the 14th Amendment, and all eyes turn to them to say, okay, what's the black perspective? And they say, that's racist. Don't ask me to be the black perspective, but that's why you're here. And so the diversity bureaucracy exists to tell black students, if you feel out of place, it's because you're in a racist institution. And you need more people like me to be your ally. Because if you don't have an ally, you're going to be crushed by white supremacy. And it's this complete vicious cycle where if blacks aren't doing well, the reason is there's not a critical mass of blacks. We'll bring in more blacks, which means we dig deeper into the applicant pool. The skills gap widens, mismatch widens. It's utterly perverse, but it keeps the thing going without, again, it distracts us from looking at the fact that unless this culture heals itself, there is very little that the outside world at this point can do.
Yeah, so I want to go back to the lottery and the test. So I think it's a self-destructing mechanism, which means that if we do have a lottery, there will be no reason to be accepted to Yale, Harvard, or Berkeley, because those institutions are built on the honors, like Thomas Sowell said, tainted honors, but like you want to have a true honor that you finished Harvard, that maybe you finished it first in your class. This is the best thing to do, to have every law firm and every firm in the country would run after you on LinkedIn, and you will get so many messages that you might put on spam because there's so many. But if you do this lottery or this affirmative action, those institutions, those racist institutions, like companies that just want to be effective, and effectiveness in the economy is profit, they wouldn't take you because they know that you are an affirmative action student. So then you don't get the honor. You pay a lot of money in order to be accepted, and you are experiencing racism from your peers and maybe from your professors, because they know that you are less educated or with lower skills. But as been said before, those students that are being accepted to Harvard with an affirmative action bonus, they could go to any university in the country and to be the first in their class and to experience an elevating experience of being smart, of being great, of succeeding. It's just not there. They're not.
Well, it doesn't work that way.
But if there wasn't this policy, they would go there, right? They would go to another universities.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's the fallacy. To get rid of racial preferences does not mean that blacks don't go to college. The same number of blacks go to college as before. They go to college on the same conditions as everybody else, colleges that they're qualified for. They're not catapulted out of their league. That would enormously improve black graduation rates. You'd get more blacks graduating with STEM degrees because they wouldn't have dropped out of the STEM field because they can't keep up, because they've been admitted.
Elaborate on this, because I think this is one of the key issues, because STEM is so good for your salary in the end, and if you drop out from STEM to some racial studies, so you're doomed to not to have a great job in. Could you please tell us what's the mechanism? He's getting into STEM in a great university, and then what?
Well, there's a very good empirical study done out of Duke University, which is in North Carolina, that found that more black males entered Duke wanting to major in STEM than white males, which is not something we would necessarily assume. But those black males were admitted with a standard deviation lower SAT scores. That is a massive difference. It's like 200 points on a 1,600 point scale. And by senior year, there were very few blacks in the graduating in STEM because they'd all switched out to other majors, the Black Studies major. Whereas had those black students with let's say 1,200s on their SATs not been put into Duke, where the average is 1,400 or 1,500 on SATs, but instead gone to University of North Carolina school, they would have been matched to their peers and would have graduated and as you say, would have had a career in STEM. But I would love it if we could just blow up these Ivy League institutions that give themselves such airs. They're so elitist and everybody plays along with it. I mean, the whole racial preference discourse around the recent Supreme Court case, SFFA v. Harvard, the defenders of preferences so that we can catapult, basically the entire black population of Harvard would not be there without racial preferences. The skills gap is that great that even though Harvard gets its pick of the best black students across the country, the skills gap is that large that, according to Harvard's own research in 2012, the black population of the undergraduate body would go down from, at that point, it was 10% to less than 1%. But the idea was, unless a black student graduates from Harvard, his life is over. He can only get a job if he's got these Ivy League credentials. Well, if that's the case, if your life is over, if you go to a state university, why should anybody suffer that handicap?
Yeah, we should close
them down, and everybody goes to Harvard, And what I don't really understand is why the second and third tier colleges put up with this BS. Why don't they stick up for themselves and say, we offer a perfectly solid education. We can develop leaders the way Harvard does. The degree of snobbery, of academic snobbery, is really something. But the businesses all go along with this. They all filed amicus briefs on Harvard's side because they want to be able to hire a black with an Ivy League degree. But again, it would be the same black. How about you hire the same black, and instead of coming out of Harvard with a watered down degree, he comes out of Boston College or Boston University with a solid degree. Let's just be honest about this, but we've got this whole shell game going on.
And we're not helping anyone in this game. But you're damn if you do and you're damn if you don't. There was research by winning prize research from the Department of Sociology in the University of Tel Aviv. And this winning prize research said that the IDF soldiers are racist, of course, right?
The idea of what?
The IDF, the Israeli army.
Oh, okay.
Oh, the Israeli army.
Defense Force.
Yeah. So the defense force is racist. Why? Because they don't rape Palestinians. I don't think that we have even one documented rape, even someone that was blamed in rape, not with evidence or not with anything. So because we are not raping Palestinians, we're racist. And if we would have raped Palestinians, we would have been colonialist, racist, till the, toxic masculinity and stuff like that. So it gets us back to the same point that we've talked before. They hate the West.
They want to take everything down. It's deliberate suicide. And I think it's unprecedented. The Chinese Cultural Revolution, you had the masses turning against the elites. Post George Floyd, you have the elites turning against everybody else and saying, this is a civilization that does not deserve to survive. And we're trying to change it demographically. We're trying to make sure that white males are always the last considered. I've spoken to so many parents recently that tell me, their white male son had near perfect medical college admission test scores to get into medical schools here. And he didn't get into a single school that he was applied for. It's unbelievable. The pressure, it's absolutely terrifying. The pressure on medical schools now to admit and promote underqualified students, and then in faculties to put them into crucial hospital jobs. And as you say, what are any of us going to do when we're in that emergency room and a black doctor comes through the room? Are we going to be looking out for ourselves enough or to say, sorry, I'm just playing the odds here? It is perfectly rational to assume that you're a preference beneficiary, and you may not be, and that's tragic for you, as you say. Or are we going to just swallow it and just hope for the best?
So you write in the book something that I think that is more concerning than, this incident when you're in front of a black doctor. You write that blacks do have some genetic characteristics that we can help them better by researching blacks sometimes
Kidney
in
function,
those diseases separately in order to give them a better treatment. Like, the radical feminists said before that women aren't being a subject of those experiments because they have the monthly period and it's really hard to measure those characteristics of women. So, and then we started checking women in separate way, in a separate clinical trials, and we don't supply a better or good medicine for blacks just because it's racist to say, they have different or slightly different diseases, and maybe we can save lives, like in the title of the book, that it threatens lives.
Yeah. I mean, there is nothing that even approaches logic, consistency, rationality in the mainstream society's treatment of race. It is unbelievable. On the one hand, it is absolute dogma that race is a social construct. It does not exist. It has no genetic basis. That is the only allowable view.
Repeat it
in
again.
College campus.
This is something that has to be said twice. Race is a social construct.
It is not the left-wing view on a college campus today is that race is a social construct. There's no genetic reality to race. So even though human beings can identify people's genetically based race on site, like 99% of the time, it's all just fake. There's no such thing as race. So on the one hand, we're supposed to say that, and any research now into heritability and traits that may be passed on in different racial groups from generation, that's banned in the United States. You cannot do it. And if they're so confident that there's nothing to the idea of race, why are they banning research into it? You know, if you're so confident that there's nothing going to see here, let it go forward. It's going forward in China. But so on the one hand, race doesn't exist. On the other hand, if you read one of the dissents, the major dissent in the recent Supreme Court case in SFFA v. Harvard, Sonia Sotomayor quotes alumna of the University of North Carolina and Harvard who are basically saying, like, if I can't talk about race in my application, there's no way that the university will know the wondrousness of me. And one girl says, if I can't talk about the way the texture of my hair changed every aspect of my life, they won't understand me. And a Harvard alumnus says, race is involved in every moment of my life. And unless I can talk about that, unless Harvard knows that I'm Black, it's not going to be able to judge me fairly. So on the other hand, race is so real. It's the only thing we're allowed to talk about. So it's a discourse that eschews the basic rules of logic and non-contradiction.
You're talking in your book about another great example about the museum, just an innocent museum that has these volunteer elderly women, especially white women, that, they are being, maybe they're not getting paid. They devote their time in order to volunteer in this museum. And those activists are saying that the fact that white elderly women volunteer and preach and teach those Black kids in this city, it's racism and it should be forbidden. And then, this institution, what can he do? Academia is against him, the media is against him, everyone are echoing each other. And what can the poor manager, the poor director of the museum can do? So he fired them all. So it's better that no one would enjoy free lectures and free guiding in a museum.
Well, first of all, let us not refer to the head of the Art Institute of Chicago as the poor director. James Rondeau, the head of the Art Institute of Chicago, is a fool. He is a absolute embarrassment to the great legacy of that institution, which is one of the most wonderful museums in the world. I recommend its little corridor of Ancien Regime pastel portraits to anybody who's in Chicago. You've got to go see it. You've got to see the Martin Quentin de la Tour and the Chardin. They're just extraordinary. James Rondeau is involved in white culling. That is the name of the game in our society today. It's white culling. Institutions brag about getting their number of whites down. And so the fact that these docents had basically given themselves a master's degree in art history in order to qualify themselves to be the most informative volunteer leaders of Chicago school children doesn't matter because they're white. this would be oppressive for Chicago's South Side children to come in and learn from these white women. So they're basically all were fired, even though they're working for free. And they're going to hire now 6 paid educators compared to 100. So how many tours are they going to be able to give?
They have tried to, to get more
Diverse,
black volunteers.
But
they
don't
maybe
volunteer.
One of the really best thing that we, even the Israeli public, can learn from America, and I think all of the world, America is number one in it. Volunteering, donating money, great institutions. You really know the job. You really know how to establish institutions, bottom up, grassroots. Even Alexis de Tocqueville wrote about it, that the American society is so vivid that it has all those small communities, like Edmund Burke wrote about it, about the small platoons that are helping each other, that are giving us something that binds us together, that is not the state, which is far away in Washington, but something that, that we can talk to, we can help, we can donate, and we can relate to. And actually, it's so weird. We're talking about logics. It's so weird that in one lesson in those social studies, they teach you that correlation is not causation. Mm-hmm. And in another course, or maybe in another lesson in the same course, they're telling them everything concerns racism. Could you please explain what's correlation is not causation? Because not all of our listeners have degrees in social studies.
That's a very broad question. Are you thinking it in terms of the fact that that academic skills gap correlates with race, but that's not
maybe I'll elaborate about the correlation and you will elaborate about the causation. So there is a correlation between the sales of ice cream and drowning in pools. When this is go up, or other way around. So this is correlation. 2 things happen at the same time. They go up together, they go down together. Actually, the cause for those 2 symptoms, for those 2 things that happened in reality, is summer. Summer causes people to buy ice cream, and summer causes people to drown in pools and in all kind of places that you go to summer. So in your book, you elaborate that the only explanation for this racial disparities by them is race, not skills, not family, not legacy, not culture, not anything. And if they would just, listen to this one fallacy that each and every one of us has this fallacy before he went to university, that we think that correlation is causation in our own lives, but someone who is a professor who is doing a research, he can't think that way because this is not the way to do to do math or to do anything that concerns logic. And how can they teach those students in one lesson that correlation is not causation in how you do a good research, and in another lesson you teach them everything concerns race. Race is the cause of everything.
Well, it's racism that's the cause of everything in our society. So I'm not sure that's an exact analogy, because I am denying racism as a dominant reality. In fact, I'm really saying it doesn't exist. There's a lot of anti-white racism. Nobody wants to talk about that. But you would say that, if I'm understanding your parallel, you would say, well, we have racism and that correlates with bad outcomes, but that doesn't mean racism is the cause. I would just deny that racism exists. Now, if you're saying is race the cause of the bad outcomes, that's a different discussion.
Yeah, so the first thing is what I meant. And actually you reminded in the book that correlation is not causation, and they think that the only cause for everything is race. They think, not we.
Racism.
Yeah, racism.
Okay.
Yeah, so actually if we kind of start wrapping it up, I would like to talk about, I think, maybe the best example of mistreating a phrase or the cultural appropriation. Like, if me, I'm not Asian, I'm half Moroccan, half Hungarian. If I would open a sushi bar, so I think it would be the best compliment to give to the Japanese culture, because I admire sushi and I think that people should enjoy sushi, and I'm actually acting Japanese. I admire them. If you admire someone, you start talking like them, you start imitating them, you start watching their videos. So why is cultural appropriation is such a shame to open a sushi bar or to do something that actually Thomas Sowell, the great Thomas Sowell, wrote about it, that the Spanish didn't conquer South America. The Spanish used the numbers from Arabic culture. They used the way they chose the north from the Chinese, and they used the navigation systems that were invented in Turkey, and they just learned from everybody those skills, and combined together, the poor Incas didn't have a chance because they were segregated in South America. They didn't learn from other countries, and poor them, they have failed, and Cortez has won because he did a cultural appropriation from all kinds of countries in order to succeed and to conquer the world.
Well, there is no more idiotic concept in our world today than cultural appropriation, and it is a way of understanding how pathetic the other side is, because culture, it's a sort of a truism, it's a redundancy. Culture is appropriation by definition. That's what it is. It is voracious. Cultures do try to, actually that's actually not true. I think cultures do differ in their degree of hunger for the other. And I think one of the signal traits of the West is that it has been both inward directed, of self-critical, of trying to examine its own forms of thinking, knowledge, political organization, questioning authority began very early with Plato and Socrates, but it has also been very oriented towards the other and curious, the exploration. Other cultures, as we know, China did wall itself off and felt like it was self-sufficient and looked so down on the rest of the world that it wasn't interested in that much absorption of other ideas. But by and large, at least in the West, the history of culture has been to be voracious. The imagination can leap over boundaries. You had the whole chinoiserie and the Japanisme trends in 19th century European art in France, of using Japanese wood blocks and Chinese art and trying to feel like, my God, this is a whole different way of seeing the world. We can learn from this, and incorporating that jazz music. You had Gershwin incorporating jazz, or other European cultures, composers using gamelan music. This sense that everything human, nothing human is alien to me. Everything is available to expand my understanding. Now we have the left cannot create. It's an admission of sterility, of capacity and imagination. All they can do is say no. All they can do is say, we're shutting you down because you have somehow, you've got taco night in the college dorm. And we have so little to protest about. Like, our lives in this university are so cushy. We're the most privileged human beings in human history because we have the thing at our fingertips that Faust sold his soul for, which is knowledge. Not that any student would use that, recognize that benefit, that luxury. But we're so desperate to find sources of oppression that we're going to say that taco night is oppressive, or rather, the tacos aren't good enough. They're soggy tacos, and therefore we're oppressed. I mean, it is pathetic.
You're a lousy cook. It's
Exactly.
not racism. It's not. Maybe it's
like Julia Child. She wanted to learn French. Is that anti-French? It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable, and it's an admission of failure. All the mob can do is destroy. They cannot create.
So the last question for our meeting is about the rape culture. Another really something that many people are talking about in Hebrew. It's called תרבות האונס, rape culture in Hebrew. And actually, this is the first time I met your ideas. I saw a video of you in YouTube, and I just said, wow, that's so into the point. So I'll try to explain the argument of rape culture, and you'll try to give a good answer. So they say that we live in a rape culture, which means that we are not really afraid, or we are not really taking into account or dealing with rape. You know, there are rapes every day in every institution. In some research, it's a few times a week, especially in college. And therefore, our whole culture hugs or accepts rape as a phenomena that we shouldn't, or that we are not fighting enough in order to prevent. This is the rape culture, as they say, right? What's your take on that?
I wrote about specifically the campus rape hysteria, which said that 1 in 4 female undergraduates would be sexually assaulted by the time they graduate.
Wouldn't they? Like, they have data, right?
Well, that's an amazing I mean, that rate exceeds the worst, like, rape violence in Africa of tribal civil wars. Doesn't approach 1 in 25, 1 in 4. But if that were the case, that 1 in 4 undergraduate females were being raped, you would think that there would have been a stampede long ago to create all-female schools. Why are mothers sending their daughters into this absolute vortex of the most terrifying experience a woman can have short of being murdered? Instead, they're clamoring to get their daughters into these schools. So are the mothers just like totally callous and child abusers? No, the fact is they know this is not going on. What's going on is a culture of drunken hookup sex where both parties are drinking themselves blotto, the females doing so in order to lower their sexual inhibitions because the pressure now is on to engage in this one-night stand culture, which then they recategorize the day after if they're feeling not sufficiently appreciated by the male as rape. But if this was something real, we would have seen a flight out of these schools. Instead, there was a total hoax story that was written about University of Virginia fraternity party that had like the most ugly, disgusting sexual violence. It was all made up. But the received wisdom is that these fraternities are just rape dens. Well, every Saturday night at the University of Virginia, the little female co-eds, sorority girls, go trooping off into the fraternity parties. So are they so stupid that they don't care or they don't know, or is it not going on? If they're so stupid that they can't protect themselves by just staying away from certain rape, then I frankly don't care too much about them. The other alternative is it's not a rape culture, and this is something that is voluntary that these girls are putting themselves into.
Yeah, so like good mother maybe should tell the daughters, you can go to those fraternities, you can go to those universities, just don't drink yourself. Don't drink. Like you said in this interview that I really loved, just give a kiss goodbye without letting him into your room, not even for a small coffee or a small drink. Just
100% avoidable.
And
100% avoidable.
Men should be gentlemen.
Exactly.
Not to try to do things that your fellow human being, maybe someone you're attracted to, maybe someone that you just want a one-night stand, would feel so badly about it afterwards. It's not behaving in a gentleman way. And I really loved to meet last week in Yellowstone, few British that called me and my brother gentlemen,
Yeah.
and they reminded us. We sat down near an elderly British, and he told us, "Goodbye, gentlemen." And we're like, "Gentlemen is obliged to oblige. You have to act in a way to win, to own this gentleman degree, which you don't need to go to university for. You just need to act in a noble way." And this is my advice for men, and the same advice for women. They can prevent it, I think, easily.
Oh yeah, yeah. If you don't want to be a male with a phony Title IX rape critique against you, walk the girl home, kiss her goodnight, give her a rose, and don't go to bed with her. That's it. Now they'll probably still come up with some sort of microaggression to go after you anyway, but it's you're minimizing your odds. And male chivalry is a thing of beauty. We are destroying it. We are saying that any kind of male heroism and traditional male virtues of valor are down. Look at we've got this awful case going on in New York City now where a Marine tried to protect his fellow subway riders, Daniel Penny, against this insane drug-addicted homeless guy by putting him temporarily in a chokehold. The guy eventually died, and we're prosecuting the Marine, Daniel Penny, for murder. And he was being chivalric. He was being a good Samaritan, and we're now saying, well, we'll crush that. And I would ask these campus rape bureaucrats, that their whole goal was supposedly protecting female. Okay, if you really believe that females at this campus are getting raped, why don't you send a message to the females on your campus? If you don't want to get raped, don't get drunk, don't get into bed with the guy. That would end it 100%. Oh, we would never do that because we never want to suggest that rape is a woman's fault. So it's back to the same issue that we started with, Tamir, personal responsibility. You have no agency. Your role in life is to blame the system and play the victim card and never take your own fate into your own hands.
I could go on and on for a few more hours, but I really want to thank you for researching, for writing those great books. We had this conversation about When Race Trumps Merit, and about Diversity Delusion is another great book of yours, and I really encourage you to keep writing and keep helping us seeing those weird things. I was really stunned by those examples of the speeding cameras and about the Philharmonic and about the volunteers, the elderly white women that were volunteering. And, if we can persuade another percentage of society to be against it, maybe we can win the war of ideas. So thank you very much.
Thank you. McDonald. We need courage. Don't be scared to be called a racist. Speak the truth.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tamir.
על המשמעות, פודקאסט פילוסופי פוליטי.